Cordova, Monroe, Theology on Tap coordinator, one of the coordinators. And I know what you're thinking. It's like, where have you been? It's like, well, I've been busy, but I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be joined by Father Ryan, who is a returning guest on the show episode. And I'm also joined by Miss Amber Danna.
Hey, y'all.
Special guest tonight. The scene is a little different. It's not tap room, but I'm going to say welcome back to the tap room. But before we get started, as we usually do, if you wouldn't mind joining us in reciting the Our Father, and we're praying for all your intentions and all of those who are listening, and ours as well. So in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Before we get started, I always like to, in case you haven't tuned in before, or you haven't watched before, not familiar, Father Ryan, if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving a quick intro of yourself,
Sure.
who you are, where you serve, and all that.
Absolutely. My name is Father Ryan Humphries. I'm a priest of the Diocese of Alexandria, Louisiana, which is in central Louisiana. I'm the pastor in a tiny little town, a paradisical place called Tallulah, Louisiana. I'm in a bizarre situation because I have assignments in two dioceses, my own and then the Diocese of Shreveport, which is where we're recording this, which also includes the city of Monroe. And so I've been a priest just shy of 20 years, and I've been on this show at least twice, and glad to be here with you, Fernando.
Thank you for coming.
Hey,
Always a
glad to be
pleasure to have you. As I always like to say, Father Ryan knows a lot about a lot. So,
Well, there was free food.
and that helps too. Yeah. You want to say a little bit about yourself, Amber?
So my name is Amber Danna, like Fernando said, and I have my bachelor's and master's in history, more specific in ancient history, but I did have a little dabble in medieval, which is going to be our topic today. So
It's more concerning that time period.
yeah.
And what we're talking about today are the Crusades.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about the Crusades. Some people think, for example, that Catholic Church would, and especially the Pope, exercising his papal authority, he just wants to grow the wealth of the church and he just wants to exercise his power. But as we all know, history a lot of times is more complex than that. It's got a lot of different sides to it. The understanding evolves over time. So we are here to tell you the real story. That's mainly here to dispel the myths that surround the Crusades. And so, and Father, maybe I'll turn to you first. Give us a picture. Okay, so when we talk about the First Crusade, what we can do is talk about the First Crusade and then kind of go from there, into some of the more later Crusades. What I want to do for the audience is kind of paint a picture of, okay, what's the environment like?
Sure.
What's the church look like? Maybe we know that involves Islam, and so Islam starts in the 7th century,
Right.
And then we know from there on they slowly, take control of holy sites.
Right.
They gain territory.
Yeah.
And so kind of leading up to the 11th century, what does that look like for us?
Well, there's a bunch of different ways we could look at it. From the point of view of the church, we should note that when the Roman Empire collapses, the church, generally speaking, moves from being city-oriented to being more monastery-oriented. And that's not universal, it's not absolute, but what it means is that you start to have less of a concern for the Pope running the show or having any meaningful control. It also means that you have these individual places where people come to gather for the faith. And of course, that's also going to tie in with the change to medieval serfdom and all of those things that you remember from, 6th grade social studies. And what's going to fundamentally happen in the West is you're going to have all this kind of fractionation, where you're going to have all these kind of breaks into little tiny kingdoms and little tiny serfdoms and these little kind of structures. And in the other side of the world, which you did not learn about in social studies, because they never tell us anything after the Mesopotamian era, then you have the rise of Islam, where you have these large, less federated, more united kingdoms. And so you have a lot of politics going on, while the church is becoming, in a certain sense, more important culturally, but a great deal less all over the place. And the idea of everybody just kind of being spread out like we are, where there's a church parish in every little town, is completely foreign to the way of thinking about the world at that time. As far as the way the practice of the faith goes, it's all very consistent. You still have the Mass being offered. You still have the sacraments. You have a couple of deep in the weeds sort of things about simplex priests, and that gives rise to things about Francis of Assisi and Dominic and that kind of crowd, but that's not really for our purposes here going to be helpful. And so that's kind of the what I would give as the super wide overview, but you might be able to paint a little bit tighter picture of some of the structures.
So structure-wise, in the medieval time, where the Crusades were just about to get started, so you only had two main countries, as you would say, modern-day France and modern-day Italy. And then you had this country that really, I did not hear about it until I was in college. Sorry to say. No, nothing against the school system, but I did not know about it until I was in college, my freshman year of college, when my professor told me about this country, these different countries of the Middle East. And I'm just like, what is all this about?
Right.
And they're like, oh yeah, they controlled the Holy Land. I'm like, no, wait, what?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah.
So you had these two main countries at the time. Understand, we had no England really. William the Conqueror, he was there, but he really didn't build up the England as we know today.
Mm-hmm.
You had Germany, really wasn't
what it is
today. It was just a bunch of villages /
Germanic tribes.
Yeah,
kind of, sort of.
exactly.
And princedoms, yeah.
Yes. So what Pope Gregory, the predecessor of Pope Urban, is like, he saw what was happening in the Middle East. He knew he needed to do something, but he really didn't have good foothold
Right.
of what to do.
I like what you were saying.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So when Pope Gregory died, here comes Pope Urban II.
Right.
Pope Urban II is seeing what Pope Gregory is seeing. And he's like, well, we gotta do something. I don't know what just yet, but we gotta do something. So.
And you're talking about maybe the Islamic,
Yeah.
foothold.
Yes,
foothold
he sees
in
that
on
he sees
sides
the Holy
and all that.
Land being.
For example, the Holy Land being under the control.
Yeah, so like we have the Solomon, correct me if I'm wrong, so Solomon's temple is one of our most sacred sites.
Right, yeah, that'd be the temple, the Jewish temple, the temple in Jerusalem, the temple of
Yes.
Solomon,
Yes.
all the same thing, yeah.
So like when Pope Urban saw this, he's like, okay, that's not good, because he sees like Islamics, they don't believe in what we believe in.
Right.
So
and the non-Muslim people who happen to be in those territories
Mhm.
conquered by Islam, they don't have as many rights as those who are Muslim.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's worth noting that you have, like you said, Europe is broken down, the Middle East is coming together, but the Middle East, it's not as if there was nothing there. This was a hotbed of Christianity. You had Chalcedonian Christianity, and in fact there are a whole pile of Eastern churches, which are Catholic churches, but they look very different from us. And so there was a huge Catholic church in Libya, in Syria, in what we would think of as Iraq and Iran. Countries didn't exist the way we think of them. But also places like Egypt, the Coptic church was gigantic. I mean, huge. And now, the rise of Islam comes with a very, very intense, clear set of principles, which says you go into a place, and if you can conquer it, you should conquer it for the Lord. And if you can't conquer it, then you should do whatever you can to kind of get a foothold in the door. And once you're in charge, you should either tell everyone they need to convert or be killed, or if you don't want to convert and we're not ready to kill you just yet, then you either have to be subjugated in some way by means of attacks or whatever, or you basically have to surrender all your rights and just plan to live under our thumb. And while that nowadays is considered Islamophobia to say that out loud, that's what happened. And so you have people like the Pope, and you have also these little kings and little princes and other little stinkers who are running the things all over Europe looking up and going, hey, you know, I had 4 random pilgrims go, and they got shot in the face by these folks over there on their way to Jerusalem because they just wanted to walk the way that Jesus walked. And that, of course, is going to cause drama, as you can imagine, because getting shot in the face is not good for most people.
Yeah.
And, you know, pilgrimages were really becoming a thing around this time, too. And so you can imagine, we think of pilgrimages today, you know, we go to all sorts of places today. But, of course, the Holy Land was probably, you know, considered the main attraction. I hate to say it, say it that way. So, you know, you got pilgrims all the time trying to make it to the Holy Land, you know, and when we say pilgrimages, what we mean is making the journey, you know, out of religious devotion, you know, and it's making that journey to a particular holy site. So you can imagine with the Holy Land under the control of, you know, under Islamic control, it was very dangerous. You know, it's a very dangerous journey for a lot of these, for the Christians, for the Catholics that are going to the Holy Land. And so a lot of times I know that it kind of, there was a German pilgrimage where you had a Good Friday massacre even. The bishop went with, you know, I think around 12,000 Germans.
Yes.
And they were massacred, you know, right there early on in the 11th century. And I think that's one of the events that's just kind of like, oh, snap, you know, that we need to do something. That's one of them. And I know that we talk about in 1071 we talk about the Byzantine, you know, Byzantium is what it's called, and you talk about Rome today. Byzantium was really, you talk about a Catholic, you know, Catholic major center. That was, I know Muslims were trying to take control of Byzantium eventually. And so maybe if y'all want to touch on that as far as, you know, once we realize, oh, these pilgrims are getting, you know, they're getting massacred, what do? We have the Muslims kind of on the doorstep.
So it wasn't just the pilgrimages. Like it was the whole Muslim ideal was knocking on the western door. So it was right at the doors of Constantinople, and the ruler Alexis, he's like, I don't have the manpower to kind of hold off these people that are trying to knock down our walls, basically. So he wrote several letters to Pope Urban saying, hey, I need help. We need to do something, because if I go down, they're coming for Rome. Like, we're the last stand before it hits Rome.
And we should add briefly that while we think of the end of the Roman Empire as the 500s, in reality, and this is bizarre because it took me a long time to learn, the Roman Empire continued with its new capital at Constantinople for 1,000 years. So the emperor, who is the Holy Roman Emperor living in modern-day Istanbul, is writing to the Pope, who is technically like his bud, and going, hey, you know, we're tag teaming this thing, and so you've got to figure out a way to get people over here, because even though it's not in Rome, and I haven't been to Rome, and I've never been in Rome, I don't know where Rome is, nobody goes to Rome, because Rome is a stinky swamp, and no one wants to go there, you know, still, this is your job, so get some folks together, you know, and do what you need to do. And so there's a big part of that we tend to kind of disconnect from.
So Pope Urban, he knows, it's it's definitely very political, and I don't think anything, up to that point, nothing of the Crusades had kind of been thought of, you know, in order to undertake up to that point.
They just knew they needed to do something, but they didn't.
And with the collapse of the Roman Empire, there was nothing to unite all of these folks except Christianity. And you have the rise of what's called Christendom as kind of an unofficial kind of grouping where we're not under the same political leadership, but we all recognize the moral leadership of the Pope. And so now you have the Pope saying, we have a moral need to save Christianity, because while the gates of hell will not prevail against the church, these folks are trying real hard.
Yeah.
And so we have a moral obligation to prevent that, because as you see, it's not just the destruction of the holy sites, it's a desire to enter in. They've already taken over North Africa, and now they're coming in and they're taking over Spain from the other side.
Yeah.
And so it's not, kind of like in the modern mind, the idea of, well, the Pope said we got to go over and just bust them up because they're messing with
Yeah.
This is an existential threat
Right.
to the entire Christian faith, that the Pope says we have a moral obligation, if we are going to be Christian soldiers, to do something about. And so that's where we kind of find ourselves.
And that's kind of where we mentioned it earlier before we went live with this episode, is that idea of just war. And the catechism, it's 2038, 2039 paragraphs, 2038, 2039. And you have kind of all the elements there. I mean, really you do. You have the aggressor, which we didn't start this fight,
Right.
There's an urgent need, there's a moral, need, imperative to defend, not just livelihood, but to defend the church, because we don't want to be wiped out. We don't want to be wiped out. And so the Pope Urban he's processing all this. So what does he do, right? And correct me if I'm wrong. He has a particular emphasis on France, because the church is kind of coming up through France at the time.
The legacy of Charlemagne.
That's right. Yeah. And so he figures, I think in his mind, he figures, well, since the church is kind of the legacy of Charlemagne, the church is kind of coming up through France. A lot of these men specifically, they've done some pretty bad stuff, and we want to integrate them into the church. So why don't I give them an opportunity, to really, it's really an act of penance in a sense for past sins,
Right.
Because these Frankish men, I mean, these guys weren't, pushovers. I mean, they were pretty rough guys, for the most part. And so he goes to France, and he has a council, sort of, at Clermont.
Yes.
I think that's how you say the French pronunciation. And he pretty much tries to sell them this idea of the crusade, in order to get some recruits to kind of buy in to this idea for defending, for taking back the Holy Land and defending Constantinople and all these territories.
So what you also have to understand is that during this time, France does have a quote unquote a king, Philip the first or second, one of those two.
Less than 3.
Yeah, less than 3. He did some very bad stuff. Like he was the Pope Urban was like, yeah, you are cheating on your wife openly.
Yeah.
And the Pope's like, no, we're not listening to you. Like he has nothing to do with the king. Like ranking wise, king's on top, but the Pope in the end is up top before the king.
Yeah, certainly on moral issues.
Yes. So, and a lot of these soldiers that followed King Philip's example, like that's where Pope Urban comes in. He's like, I'm going to give you a way out.
Right.
You want penance? Here's your gateway to get out of penance. Get your penance.
And we should be clear that the Pope was offering them what we would call an indulgence nowadays. That theology was still in development. The phraseology was not exactly the same. But the principle is very, very similar to what we have now. And so he basically, the Pope and those others who preached it, because there were a lot of bishops who preached it, said, look, you're a hot mess. We understand. And so you can kind of imagine basically like one of those commercials when you're accidentally up at 3 a.m. and they're desperately trying to sell you heart medication you don't need. And, I've never had that in the church. But anyway, but they're like, listen, have you ever, taken Plomox and gotten, diabetes from your medicine? You need to join our class action lawsuit. And the Pope is saying, listen, if you want to give up your bad ways of life, and if you want to agree to go on this mission, then you can go to Mass, you'll get a special blessing, you'll go to what passed for confession then, because there's still a development in the theology of the actual personal confession that's still happening. Nowadays, we go to confession in a nice little box, and Father doesn't say anything and nobody can hear. Back then, it involved a lot more being very, very public, and the penances nowadays are 2 or 3 Hail Marys, and if you did something real bad, a rosary.
Yeah.
Back then, it was 3 years in the order of penitence. And so it's no joke. Like, I mean, this is a big opportunity for people who are looking up and going, I've been a hot mess, and I'd like to not be a hot mess, maybe even go to heaven. And so the Pope is tying in the idea of get your act together, receive this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You're kind of edging onto martyrdom sort of thing a little bit, because some of those sermons gave that way. And so the idea is that this is a big opportunity for you to not just serve the Lord, but to get your own soul in order. And again, for us, that seems normal, because we have a dozen, any Catholic can receive about 16 plenary indulgences a year just for going to Mass their ordinary parish, right? We don't always know about them, but they're there. Back then, that was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And for back then, if you didn't have the chance to go to confession, this is the kind of thing where you've got to go ask the bishop in a very public way for confession, confess your sins in a very public way, and then have a 3 or 4 year-long penance given to you. And this could happen once or twice in life. So we're not talking about the same kind of much easier version of Christianity now than then. And so just kind of keep your head around the idea of that was what was on offer.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that frames it in the right mindset, in the minds of these Frankish men. And the Pope pretty much echoes pretty much says what you just said.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, listen, your property is going to be here, hopefully, when you get back, because we know y'all are in debt, and this is going to be expensive. But this is an opportunity for you to get that indulgence. And he made it clear to them that this was not about honor or wealth. This is strictly devotional. It's a spiritual, what we would say an arm. It would be an armed pilgrimage, and so, because this materially, you got nothing to gain from this.
Not really.
No.
Promise of coming back, alive. And they got nothing to gain from this. It was mainly, it's interesting. It's a spiritual journey as well. Fighting, literally fighting in the service of the church, and possibly dying.
For the first several crusades, that's definitely
the case.
There's no payoff.
Yeah.
What you also have to understand is that not everybody agreed with what the Pope was saying. He's like, we got to go help get back the Holy Land, because we are having several pilgrimages get massacred there on their way to the Holy Lands. A lot of people weren't on the same page as him. They're like, half of us are just staying here. There's only a handful in our whole country or village that are going on that pilgrimage. So why does that affect us?
Right.
So that's a lot of people's mindset. Now, some of them did believe what the Pope was saying. Like, we do need to go do that. And there was a small little group who backed up the Pope. But there again, you still have those same people that are like, that's not what we believe in, because the church says don't go up against people. Like, they don't, what's the word I'm looking for?
Well, pacifism is virtually looking
Yeah,
for. But and even that was kind of like, it felt like more of an excuse than an actual.
Yes.
Because the arguments you read is like, well, by the way, I'm a pacifist. I beat that guy across the street because he took my pig, but I mean, I'm a pacifist.
Exactly.
That kind of sketchy.
Yes.
And like I said, these were rough guys.
Yeah.
So eventually, he was able to garner enough men. He was able to do enough recruitment, and they ended up, at least like you were mentioning, the first couple of crusades, especially the first crusade, they were able to regain control.
Right.
Of the
Yes.
Holy Land.
Oh, yeah.
And they were able to go to Constantinople and defend the lands there as well. Now, as far as after, and if y'all want to mention anything more on the first, second, or third crusades, feel free to do that. But after that,
I just want to add, the nomenclature here, the phrasing is difficult, because folks will say the Crusades. But it's really hard to talk about the Crusades. The example I use is like, let's talk about the French Wars, where you're like, there's a lot of different crusades fought for a lot of different reasons. Some are big organized things, some are not so much. Some you've got some cat in Zagreb who says, hey, let's get together and see if we can't go over and murder somebody and set up an olive wood shop, kind of thing. So I mean, it's very, very difficult to say the Crusades by nomenclature. We generally talk about the first, second, and third Crusades. Those aren't the names that everybody would use for them, so don't fret if you look up on Wikipedia or something and go, I don't know what that's means. Nobody knows exactly how to describe this stuff. And certainly in the modern day obsession with political correctness, it's impossible to talk about anything with nuance. So 1, 2, 3, just kind of say those are the biggies before the Fourth Crusade, which is a different animal.
Which is a completely different animal. So, because you still have the Knights Templar, for example, which was it was kind of like a warrior monastic order founded.
/ Western Union.
So was that, I have a question. So was the Templar wasn't right at there at the beginning. They were kind of, okay, after the First Crusade, maybe second and third, everybody comes back. And
well, actually, there was in Jerusalem. They did have an order prior to the Crusades, but I forget who.
It wasn't formalized.
It was formalized. Like they were like a lot of people respected them. They were like whatever they said went. So imagine them as kind of like the Marines at the time. Like when they came in, they got the job done. So, but.
The church needed a standing, kind of like a standing army, a standing
order. It needs to expand beyond the city, I think is the ideal.
So, but prior to the First Crusade, they disbanded the former Knights.
The former structure of the Knights Templar.
Mainly because the leaders of the cities were like, we're getting a little too powerful, and we're not liking that. Several of those men died at the stake, burned alive, because they're like, well, we're not leaving our morals, like So a lot of them died for what they believed in.
We should add too that the Western Union thing wasn't really a joke. They were actually the Western Union, where you could put money into a branch of the orders of the Knights Templar in France.
It was literally the first bank.
And you could
first international bank.
And there were messages, secure messages sent, and there was money transfer just like Western Union. And so there was a certain degree of anxiety where if this bishop in, say, France could suppress the order, then he could take the giant pile of cash. So there's a lot of back and forth there, and it's not just the bishop. Sometimes it's the mayor, sometimes it's the governor, oftentimes it's the greedy little prince. And so you have a lot of drama that arises where the church is trying to do something good, get something good out of it, and then you have some rando that comes in and messes around it. So there's that overlaying component of there's big money involved. And so the Knights Templar are going to be dissolved, reestablished, dissolved, reestablished, dissolved, reestablished, over and over again.
And the majority, I think for the Knights Templar, it kind of, we have another guest on the show.
She just wanted
we're currently in the home of the
domestic church.
The domestic, that's right. St. Francis. But so the Knights Templar, it kind of starts in 119, kind of sort of around that time. Again, because they kind of wanted, okay, so we've gotten the Holy Land back. We kind of need a standing army, just like any country would have a standing army, to preserve and defend the lands that we have finally gotten back. And I think since it's a kind of a warrior monastic type order, I think most of the men, they have to actually take vows of celibacy. Their chastity, poverty. And it's a serious business.
Normally they would do it like during the Purple Urban speech at Clermont. I'm going to butcher that. I'm sorry for people in France.
Well, it's okay.
So a lot of them took their vow right there in front of the Pope. They took the knee, and they had a long epic vow. A lot of the vows were wrote down saying, okay, this is what we're going to say from now on, basically, because a lot of the stuff was gone. So they really had to rebuild that whole the Knights Templar all from the bottom up.
Yeah. I mean, the whole premise of reestablishing religious orders is challenging, but the Knights Templar, especially with their banking component and the soldiering component, was challenging. And then you had some folks who wanted to join for not good reasons. That created its own layer of drama. And of course, everyone knows that the Knights Templar eventually kind of decayed into the Freemasons, which became kind of an order that was actively created for the purpose of retaliating against the papacy for the crimes that the papacy committed against the Knights Templar. At the top of that list, of course, stealing money from people in what we would consider to be modern day England, France, Belgium, Switzerland, and there's another country that had a lot of them in there somewhere too. But anyway, but that's much later. At this point, the order has still mostly got its act together, and it's fighting against mayors, princelings, and bishops who are actively suppressing and resuppressing and unsuppressing, and very, very confusing kind of mess.
And I don't know if that's contributing later on to the subsequent crusade. I don't know if that contributes to really. We have to admit the failures of to preserve the lands, the holy sites that the church has control of at the time, because once you get past the Third Crusade, you go on the fourth, fifth, sixth. We don't do so well in terms of trying to regain further, territory and preserve the territory we have, currently.
Well, and the core problem is ultimately that the West has no unified leadership. The Pope is a moral leader, but the Pope turns over a lot. We're reaching kind of a moment where, with the Reconquista in Spain and all the chaos of the Med and all the various other things going on, that everybody's got other things they need to worry about. And so France can't say, let's pick up a third of our population and set them up in Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Syria. So they go over, they get the Holy Land back, they hand the Holy Land over to a handful of peacekeepers and Knights Templar, and then exactly 7 years later, it all goes straight back to pot. And so we have to kind of reset from zero, whereas in the East, the Muslims with the various caliphates are highly organized and highly unified. And of course, they're not looking to control a gigantic swath of territory. They're just looking to kind of control largely a desert with a handful of oases, kind of places to be, and river basins. And so it's one of those impossible tasks from the beginning that was never ever going to go well. It's kind of like there's a reason that nobody's ever gone into Afghanistan and won, even the Soviet Empire, because you just don't win there. It's not the way it works. It's not, it just can't.
So as you can imagine, over the course of the next 2 centuries, we gradually start losing the land that we regained, and all our progress is pretty much wiped out. And it doesn't help that the French monarchy is also at the same time trying to undermine the Knights Templar. You have the Hospitaliers as well, and they're essentially trying to drive the Knights into the ground. So that doesn't help. So you're kind of fighting a losing battle on the foreign front and on the home front as well. And I know King Philip IV is primarily behind that. There's just a pile of confusion. The famous event where things you really go, this is where things really were already going the wrong way, but they're really wrong, is when the Fourth Crusade, the French soldiers are parked outside of Constantinople, and they get rowdy because this is what French people do, and they basically decide, why not sack the city? It'd be a hoot. And so they get drunk and they go and sack the city of Constantinople, and at this point you start to have a real breakdown where the East is Eastern Catholicism is basically saying, we don't want anything more to do with you, you're out, you're done.
And it's not as if that's the only time chaos happened, but that's the famous time. And then there are other kind of little pieces to sprinkle in, not to backtrack too much, but you have the Reconquista happening in Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, where there is this great effort to kind of get rid of the Muslims in what is modern day Spain and Portugal, and that's chaos and confusion, and there's a lot of drama there. And then of course you have these outside forces nobody was expecting, like the Mongols under the leadership of Subutai. This is a little earlier. But this cat shows up on the scene, and he's got a handful of folks with him, and these Mongols have destroyed everybody in their path. They've wiped out Muslims and everybody else, and then they get up against the Hungarian Hussars, these greatest warriors in the European world, Christendom, and these Mongols just spank them. I mean, it's over like that. And the only reason they stop is because they get a random memo from Genghis Khan, or Genghis Khan if you prefer, who says, come back, we've got other things to do. There's a council that needs to happen. I mean, otherwise, the entire European world would probably cease to exist. So you have all these kinds of crazy other things going on that put everybody in a genuine state of fear. And as this is happening, it starts to become less and less important that we're protecting the Holy Land over there. Yes, it's bad. Yes, we want to keep it. But you know what? If you can't go safely on a pilgrimage, don't go on a pilgrimage. Maybe go to Santiago de Compostela the other way. They got better food anyway. And so this is about the time where the pilgrimage to the Holy Land starts to take a second place to the pilgrimage to Rome, or the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, or the pilgrimage later on to Central, to Westminster and elsewhere. And so you have this kind of radical shift happening in every aspect of the way we think about the world as the kind of third, fourth, fifth Crusades are coming about. And so the whole thing is flipped on its head. It really is.
Yeah. And then, I mean, it doesn't really get any better as far as once you get after the Fifth Crusade.
No.
A lot of people, I think the public opinion and the support kind of starts to wane away. It starts to die down.
Yeah, during the Fourth and Fifth Crusades, usually it pretty much starts with the Fourth Crusade, and then just there on in, it was more about money, land, basically who had the bigger army to go on to the Holy Land, but really half of them didn't even make it to the Holy Land. They mainly just stopped in somewhere in France or modern day Hungary and just came back.
Yeah.
A lot of these people, this is where we get King Philip IV and Richard the Lionheart of England, because he went on the Third Crusade when he was still a prince, and then when he went on the Fourth Crusade, he didn't even make it to the Holy Land. Yeah. Now I'm second guessing myself.
You're right.
Yeah. So.
And then there's the whole Robin Hood thing.
Oh yeah, this is where the legend of the Robin Hood came in.
Let's get into Robin Hood.
I'm a Kevin Costner being with it. Yeah, Richard
Russell Crowe.
Yeah.
There's so many Robin Hood
Yeah,
movies.
Seriously, off topic. I just learned that that Robin Hood
Which
King
one?
of Thieves
King of Thieves,
theme was used in the Disney Channel promotion just later on.
Fun fact.
But we digress.
We digress.
Yeah.
But then you have the idea of like people going there on these crusades, and the crusades fail from lack of money or whatever before they even get there.
So this is where the finances, the economic standpoint of, like, in the history standpoint, they're like, okay, yeah, we got the religion part, but as the historian part, they're like, okay, what really broke it down, history-wise? So there was economics. You have this large army, and how we're going to feed them, and how we're going to pay them. There's only so much land that we can give them.
Right.
One little plot here, one plot there. That plot's not going to keep a man
And their family.
and their family. Yes. So it was economics, also political. Those two things will pretty much be the downfall of any big campaign. But it can also help it, saying, oh, yeah, we need money. Okay, we need to go somewhere and win some battles. That way we can keep this army still together. That's actually how a lot of the American, during the American Revolution, George Washington's like, we need to keep this army. We need to win a battle.
Yeah,
like,
nobody
now.
wants to break up an army if you,
No.
if you can keep it, but
So,
Yeah, and again, to add to the economic, political woes,
yeah.
the morale was really down because of all the, all the accusations that were being hurled at them, not just due to their, the Fourth Crusades, Fifth Crusades and going on, but again, the monarchy was just, they were hammering them, accusing them of worshiping idols, accusing them of heresy and all that. And I think it was the 14th century when finally Pope Clement decided, okay, enough's enough.
We're done with it.
We're just done with the Knights. Let's we had somewhat of a good run first and third crusades. It's not really a thing anymore.
Yeah.
So the Knights were disbanded early 14th century, and that pretty much, unfortunately, it was kind of it wasn't the ending that we were probably that everyone wanted, but it ended up being not so much of a success. So I guess to sum it up, what could we say? Could we say that maybe first through third crusades they had good motives behind them, just motives behind them, and that doesn't mean to say that every act itself was just. Just that in any war, you've got immoral acts, unjust acts that happen, and that's for any campaign. You could say, because hey, we all have fallen, sinful natures, right? But once you get past the Third Crusade, it's kind of hard to see. It's like, it's kind of hard to see what the good justification was, for those.
I do think we have to reject outright, though, the modern idea that the Crusades were a militant effort to evangelize and force others to become Christians. The Crusades were fought as a response, not as an aggressive action. Beside the fact that it was taking place on somebody else's turf, it was our turf first. It's not like, and so, and there was a legitimate sense of the need to fill in the gap that was missing of an overarching unified structure for global society. And so all of that comes with good motives. Of course, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but it was not in any way, shape, or form the kind of modern caricature of a bunch of Parkview Baptist lunatics, whatever. I don't even know what church is. What is the one? Westboro Baptist Church.
Westboro.
Well, it's not like these kind of lunatic Westboro Baptist Church people who are taking a Bible with a shotgun attached to it, and running around trying to shoot people and go, "You're going to get on my side, I'm going to whoop you," kind of thing. That's lunacy. That is a caricature put forward by modern kind of liberal culture, but it's not remotely like what's actually happening, good or bad. The Crusades were fought for good cause.
And I think we could also put in the factor that a lot of movies, when we're talking about Robin Hood, King Richard the Lionheart, when you see that, they're like going for the Crusades and all that. They get that mindset of saying, oh, it was bloody. Like they're just doing it just to do it, and that's not really what happened.
It was an act of great devotion and penance, for the warrior monks. Or for a lot of these men that were recruited and decided to devote their lives, to this mission. I also throw in that I think a myth, or sometimes people get the wrong idea. The Muslim hostility, towards non-Christians or Christians themselves, it didn't start because of the Crusades. Muhammad is recorded as saying, "Go and fight all these men until they say there is no God but Allah."
It's a vicious, warlike faith from the beginning.
That's where the jihad comes from. It's that holy. They consider it a holy war.
Yes.
But if you want to talk about evangelization through military force, that was more on the Islamic side, and like we mentioned, starting in the 7th century, when Islam started. But it wasn't because of the Crusades. That's what the Quran teaches. And that is the official teaching. Even if every Muslim doesn't necessarily ascribe to it.
Of course.
So this is something else that I also want to throw out. that people may have a misconception about today. But other than that, is there anything else you guys want to throw in as far as the Crusades?
No.
So a couple of book recommendations. Jonathan Riley Smith is a historian that I think he's based out of England. He's one that I've read before. He's a particularly well-known one, renowned one as well as it relates to the Crusades. A couple of his books that are highly recommended are What Were the Crusades by Jonathan Riley Smith. I've actually read another book of his, The Crusades, Christianity, and Islam. Not an easy read. The number of pages is not that much. It's not an easy read. I mean, it's not, I read through the whole thing, but it was painstaking. And The Real Story of Catholic History by Steve Weidenkamp. I haven't read through this whole thing, but there are a few chapters. If you just want the nuts and bolts or the quick summary of it, it's got some chapters on the Crusades as well.
As a historian standpoint, I'm not saying that I've never heard of these. I don't know if they're more so like talking about the religion, or is it?
Jonathan Riley Smith is more on the historical side.
Okay.
Steve Weidenkamp, we have another guest back. Steve is more on the spirit Catholic, on the Catholic perspective of it.
Yeah. So one of my recommendations is it's called The Story of the Crusades, and it's by Alfred Duggan. And this one talks about all the aspects of the Crusades, from the very beginning, the economics, the political, everything. So it goes very deep into each aspect of the Crusades, of the first Crusades. It doesn't really go into the other Crusades. It's mainly focusing on the first one, the big one, the one that started it all.
Sure.
So that's my recommendation. And you can get it a hard copy, but it's very hard. But you can go on several websites, and they'll have the book that you can read for free.
Sure. I'd recommend, for what it's worth, there's a lady named Diane Moczar. I don't know how to pronounce her name for real. Moczar. I'm sure it's Polish, so it's probably like Modo or something. But she's written a number of excellent books, and one is called 10 Dates Every Catholic Should Know. And it's absolutely spectacular. And she covers in nice, broad scope a lot of topics, including the Crusades, that are definitely worth looking into. That book is on Amazon. It's easy to get a hold of. And again, her name is Diane Moczar, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm just now remembering this. I think it was this past week that we had the first, when the Muslims first came into the Holy Lands and took the temple, the Holy Temple of Jerusalem, and where they massacred like 10,000 people there.
Like the anniversary.
Yeah, the anniversary.
Okay.
It was, I think it was this past week, and that kind of sparked the first crusade of the Western Empire.
Okay.
So I think it was this week.
Fascinating.
So, fun fact.
At the time of this video. Of course.
Yeah.
At the time, yeah. Is there anything, would you like to plug anything, any projects that you're working on, Father, or anything, any podcasts that presentations that you...
No, I'm boring. Nothing really. I've got my parish, and I've got my live streams. If you're interested, you can follow my parish on Facebook at facebook.com/Saint Edward Tallulah, STEDWARD Tallulah, TALLULH, and you can get my live streams and stuff like that there.
Cool. All right. Well, thank y'all for contributing to this conversation.
Happy to help.
I really appreciate it. We definitely always enjoy having guests on. And for sure we'll look at have another one here soon.
Yeah.
But thank you all for tuning in to Theology on Tap, Monroe. Please also check out Theology on Tap Shreveport if you're in the Shreveport area. They're just now starting back, just so you know. But if you haven't already, like us on Facebook, subscribe if you can on Facebook, on Instagram, and of course our YouTube channel, which we're posting videos here and there on. We're going to try to do more this fall/winter and beginning in the spring. But other than that, thanks for tuning in again. And remember to stay thirsty, and God bless.